look, if we want to raise children who are the types of humans we like to interact with, who when they make mistakes, they say they're sorry, who acknowledge the fact that sometimes they don't show up in the world the way they'd like to, we need to model that for them as their parents. And it's something that I try to do. I try to not have to do it a lot, if that makes sense. I try not to create a scenario where I have to apologize often. But when I'm in that mode and when I am, dysregulated, when I am shorter than I want to be, when I'm sharper than I want to be, I try to really press on the brakes and slow things down and acknowledge like, hey, so daddy's showing up in a way that he doesn't want to. And I'm sorry, you boys don't deserve the outburst I just had. You don't deserve the frustration. You don't deserve the shortness. Here's what was happening.
All right, fellas. Joey Coleman's here today. And I got to tell you, I was looking forward to this, but even in the few minutes of us just chatting about the show and what we were going to talk about today, I was like, oh, this is why I'm really excited for this conversation. Joey's energy is, it's kind, but it's confident also. And I love talking to people that are both wise, and you can tell they have no problem making a decision, no problem making shit happen, and they also are just nice people to be around. And I feel like Joey is that guy. So I'm excited about this conversation. I also want to say that Joey has been on the show before. I think it was episode 24-ish. It was back in 2018. We talked about a lot of cool stuff. I listened to that show recently, and not only were there things that were mentioned in that show that I still talk about to this day, like Band-Aid, plaster, casket concepts that you have to go back and listen. That's the teaser you might be able to figure it out, to be honest. But I said those things repeatedly, and I think that's a sign of a great show. And there were other things that I heard 5 years later that I was like, oh yeah, that was so good. I'm so glad I went back and listened to it. So if you like Joey today, go back and check it out. But I want to tell you what's changed in Joey's world is that there was a couple of things that have changed and a couple of things that haven't. He's still writing kick-ass books. He's still giving kick-ass speeches. The latest bestseller book, Wall Street Journal bestseller book, is Never Lose an Employee Again, which makes tons of sense because the previous book that kicked ass was Never Lose a Customer Again. And I can tell you also from that book, even recently, not knowing that Joey was coming back on the show, I talked with the team and I was like, the first 100 days matter. We got to nail the first 100 days. And God, I think I even go all the way back maybe to mastermind talks with Jason Gaynor. And I think I might have heard Joey there. And this idea of the first 100 days is a remarkable concept. We'll unpack that, I'm sure, a little bit today. But I've alluded to a lot here, and I'm not reading directly from the bio because I feel like I could just speak from the heart when it comes to Joey and some of his accomplishments. But let me just say this. He's been all around the world. He's spoken to some of the biggest audiences. Of course, I could name drop and tell you all the things. Volkswagen, Whirlpool, Zappos. He travels with his family, which we talked about previously, how many passport stamps his kids have. And one of the things he said, by the way, in the former interview, which was really cool, is he goes, what an awesome graduation gift when my kids are going to basically be, Delta Million Mile Sky reward people with a passport full of stamps. Like, what a rite of passage into your life to see the world, And anyway, you can go back and hear all that in that show. But it's awesome. Joey's a father of 2 boys. He is married. He loves to do the work, but he also loves to be at home with his kids playing Legos and all the other good stuff. So, guys, enjoy this conversation with my buddy Joey. And Joey, welcome back to the show.
Oh, Jon, thank you so much for the kind and generous introduction and for having me back on the show. I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a long time because I know many front row dads. I know many of your listeners and your fans and your folks who just soak up everything you have to share. And I'm just thrilled to be able to be a guest today and dive into some fun conversations.
Well, so this was the real conversation in my head earlier today when I was listening to you tell stories on the podcast. I was like, yeah, we have a great show because we have people like Joey that come and share stories. So when people tell me over the years, like, I have so much value from the show, I'm like, yeah, because of guys like Joey who are doing the work and opening up and being real with us. So very, very cool, man. When we were preparing to dig in here and hit record, we're talking a little bit about our summers. And I know that the Vromans had a month in Europe. And so people, had they been listening to the show, we had some guest hosts. We had Hal Elrod host Mickey Willis. We have a show dropping where my buddy Brad interviewed Michael Hyatt. We had some really fun guest hosts and some guests that were friends of friends. And I was traveling. So I was like a month in Europe. And we were talking about that 5 years ago of traveling with our families, being in Europe. You had an interesting summer, but it wasn't necessarily in Europe. But dude, what were you up to summer of 2023 for you?
So, I think about kids going back to school and writing the how I spent my summer vacation essays, right? And, how Joey spent at least the first third of his summer was in the throes of launching a new book. Yeah. And that is a gauntlet that once it's thrown down, man, it's an adventure to try to pick up and run with. There were a lot of things that I think I did better this time around, just in terms of protecting my own sanity and mental health and well-being. I also felt like I had learned a thing or two, but I also, if I'm being really honest, and it's one of the things that I so both appreciate about your show and your community, and I want to honor that by showing up that way. I had a lot of pressure to not have that I put on myself. Let me be very clear. This was self-induced pressure to not have a crappy sophomore album. Like, so many people talk about, oh, well, they did their second one. It's not as good as their first one, but it's all right. And there's some practical reasons for that. But I realized after the book came out and as kind of the dust started to settle 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, that I had put a good amount of pressure on myself. So that was kind of the first part of the summer. That was June. July was the aftermath of that, continuing podcast tours, continuing giving presentations, etc. I hosted I had 2 big goals on my calendar for 2023. Launch my newest book and co-host an event for speakers with my good friend Philip McKernan, who is an absolute rock star of a human being. And so we had an intimate gathering of about 15 people where we did speaker training for them. And what's fascinating is now we're, having this conversation in August, and my 2 biggest goals for the year are done. And it's kind of creating a weird balance / dichotomy / thought process for me as I look from now till the end of this year, thinking about, okay, what now when the 2 major things are done? But I am super excited about your summer in Europe, or your month in Europe. That is something that is on the horizon for the Coleman family. Favorite memory, if I may ask, or favorite magical moment from the Vromans Euro tour?
What just came to mind was towards the end of the trip, and this was by design. We wanted to be in Switzerland, in nature, hiking, into the hills, into the mountains. And there was this one moment in one of our final days there where we just set out from our Airbnb. We could literally walk to the base of the Alps. We walked into the woods, up into this clearing. There was this barn there that looked like it was in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't even see it from the base of the mountain. You could only see it when you emerged from the forest. And we found out it was a restaurant. We're like, oh, this could be very interesting. I don't know. You don't know what you're walking into. And we walk in and you don't hear anything. We walk up these stairs and then we open the door and there's a restaurant and there's 7 families all sitting down having a meal. And so we sit down, we have dinner in the base of the Alps at this restaurant that's feels like it's in the middle of nowhere. It's cows with bells on and, waterfalls and all this stuff around us, but it's very local. And then we left there and we went hiking, and there's the path that is obviously the path, and then there's just like the grass, and we're like, let's just walk through the grass to the top of that hill. And I remember walking with my family, and I was like, I feel like the greatest dad in the world right now. Just walking up a hill, right? Just walking up a hill. I feel like the greatest dad in the world because I'm creating this space and this breath for my family. And there was other more chaotic parts. Like we were in the southern coast of France with our friends. So we had like several families, and it was just busy and fun and full, and dinners and all of that was great. The energy of Nice, people walking through the streets, shopping, markets, things like that. Very different than what we experienced in Switzerland by ourselves in a mountain, just hiking through the mountains. So that's one that comes to mind, and it was awesome.
Oh, I love every piece of that. What
I also want to contrast with is I want to say something that there was a picture I posted when we were, maybe it was Nice. Took a picture of my family on these steps, and beautiful picture of my wife and my two boys. And it was like, this is the crew, and we travel and we laugh and we have fun. It just looks like we were in the perfect zone, right? But I was like, in addition to this, we also have cried. I have said I will never travel with my family ever again. And dude, the amount of people who responded to me going, thank you for that honesty of like when it doesn't go well. And I want to ask you about this, Joey, because again, I see you as such a nice person, so together. And I'm not trying to drag you through the mud here, but I am saying like, dude, when I get stressed, when I've got pressure on myself, when I'm dysregulated, when I'm out of my routine, maybe, that type of thing, I do get quick, like with my kids, I am much more impatient. When you are in launch mode with the book, when you're doing what you do and the pressure rises, does that show up in your family? And if so, what does that look like, and how do you navigate it?
Yeah, only absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not, let me be clear, I'm not proud of that, but couple thoughts on that. Number one, I like to think the second time around I was better than the first time around. And I think if you were to ask my wife, she would agree. My boys were, my last book came out 5 years ago. So my boys are 7 and 10. They were 2 and 5. I don't think they quite have the same contextualization of those memories.
Sure.
But, in conversation with my wife, it's, I would posit it was better, but was it perfect? No, I don't think perfect is attainable. I think we strive to be the best dad we can be. We strive to be the best parent we can be, but it doesn't always work that way. What I was watching. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, and I try to do my best to curate the people that I'm friends with on social media to, as a general rule, only be friends with people I've actually met in real life, and only be connected to people that I've actually had. And I know that makes me sound super old when I say that, but that's currently how I've approached social media. Maybe that will change in the future. But I saw this great video from Ryan Holiday, and he was talking about the importance of apologizing to our children. Mm. And I'm paraphrasing. Go check out Ryan's video. He says it beautifully. But it was basically like, look, if we want to raise children who are the types of humans we like to interact with, who when they make mistakes, they say they're sorry, who acknowledge the fact that sometimes they don't show up in the world the way they'd like to, we need to model that for them as their parents. And it's something that I try to do. I try to not have to do it a lot, if that makes sense. I try not to create a scenario where I have to apologize often. But when I'm in that mode, and when I am, dysregulated, when I am shorter than I want to be, when I'm sharper than I want to be, I try to really press on the brakes and slow things down and acknowledge like, hey, so daddy's showing up in a way that he doesn't want to. And I'm sorry, you boys don't deserve the outburst I just had. You don't deserve the frustration. You don't deserve the shortness. Here's what was happening. And like, here's what's going on in your little world. And that sounds pejorative, but like, here's what's going on in your world. And here's some of the other things that you don't know about that daddy's dealing with. And trying to make them aware of there are things beyond them that are happening. And I like to think some of that is sinking in. And my wife Barrett is incredibly talented at saying, well, what else could be going on in that person's life that is creating it? And she's like, oh my God, I learn from her all day, every day in that. Like, even when I come to her sometimes, I'm not like, oh, this person's driving me crazy. And she's like, well, it might be the blah, blah, blah. And there's a part of me that's like, no, I don't want to hear the good. Like, you're 100% right. And I just want to wallow in my own self-pity and frustration. And it's like, no. But, we had a situation with my boys where I was driving them home from school last year, and something had happened at school. And one of the kids said to the other one, well, what else could be going on with that kid? And I was like, oh, yes, it's sinking in. Like, they're getting it. And like, if we can just remember that we have no idea what is going on in the other person's life. Even if we think we know, we don't really know.
Yeah.
It allows us, I think, to lead with a lot more empathy and a lot more love.
Dude, this is so important. And not only do I think it's like what else is going on in their life, I've been learning lately that, and I'm trying to maintain consciousness of this question, which is who am I talking to in this conversation? So as an example, so Ocean just started school. It was the night before his first night, and he's looking for this little toy, and he's melting down because he can't find this toy. He's getting angry at mom, and she's getting frustrated. And then finally, it just hits me. I'm sitting on the couch, and I look at Ocean, and I go, Ocean, here's what I think. I think what's happening is you want this toy. I was preceded a question. Why do you want the toy? He said, I want to take it to school. I go, buddy, my sense is that maybe you wanted to find this toy to take it to school, to make friends. And right now you're afraid that if you don't have this toy to show your friends, you're not going to make friends. And that's showing up as anger. But really what you're feeling is fear. And I could see him get that I get him. And then I realized that's who I'm talking to, right? Or in my own world, the way it shows up is like, who's reacting to my wife as an example? We have a fiery relationship, and I'm like, is it my inner child that's in the driver's seat? Who am I talking? Who's doing the talking? And my buddy Tim and I were chatting the other day that if I react quickly, or I feel the need to make my point quickly, my inner child is the one in the conversation. And if I have space and time, it's my adult that's actually running the show. If I'm like, I can handle this tomorrow, or I can sit on this for a little bit, that's my adult that's running the conversation. So I think that's really important.
So true. When you're telling this story, Jon, what comes up for me is this art piece that was at Burning Man. I didn't see it at Burning Man, but I heard about it afterwards.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, right. It's this Ukrainian. I'm actually pulling it up because I didn't remember off the top of my head. It's a Ukrainian artist,
yes.
Alexander Milov.
Yes,
and
it's
right. Got these two adult forms kind of back to back, looking away from each other, and then inside the sculpture you see the two little kids' forms that are kind of connecting and glowing and interacting. And I think the point you make is so relevant to so many of our relationships. Like, who is showing up in this conversation? When I had the chance to work for my dad, and working in a family business and being the oldest son working for your father, man, we could have just had a therapist couch laid out, right? There's just layers and layers and layers.
He was a criminal defense attorney.
He was a criminal defense attorney, yep, and so was I. And so I'm coming out of law school, and I go to work for him, and I'd grown up in the practice, and I'd grown up, with a criminal defense lawyer as a father, which is a whole separate episode. It was just an amazing experience, but also a challenging experience. And when we started working together, we came up with this question, which anytime I talk to somebody, they're in a family business, I recommend that they adopt this series of questions. When we were in conversation and it started getting a little frothy and it started getting a little agitated, either one of us could stop the conversation and say, are we having an employer-employee conversation or a father-son conversation? And the other person had to answer that question in the moment. And then the person who asked had to proceed with that conversation within that boundary of a relationship.
Wow.
And I think if we recognize, Are we having a father-son conversation? Are we having a mother-daughter conversation? Are we having a husband-wife conversation? Are we having a employer-employee conversation? Are we having a human-to-human conversation? Like, if we can agree to the parameters of who's in the conversation, I think it has the power to dramatically shift our language, to dramatically shift our emotions, how we show up, the perspective we bring. And, I commend you for, in that moment, not getting spun up by your son's fear masking as anger and frustration.
You mean like I normally do?
Well, right. Well, because you're human.
Right.
Because you're human, right? This is how humans react. Yeah. And it's like, I think the opportunity that's available to all of us is to constantly try to be the best version of ourselves, yes, understanding that we're not going to achieve that goal in every minute of every day. I don't know anyone who achieves that goal in every minute of every day. That's the human condition, or at least in my worldview of the human condition.
Yeah. We're certainly not following any type of format here in these questions, and I think it's like perfect transition to talk about your book, which I'm excited about, because when I posted to the guys that you were coming on the show, and I was like, what do you want to ask? A lot of the questions, the spirit of it, and I was looking for like what's behind the question, like what's going on here, which is also a great dad tip, right? It's just, that's what we're talking about. I did the same thing with these questions. It's like, what's really being said? Not with the words, but the energy and the spirit of it.
I think it's a great human thing to try to do.
Thing.
Like what is actually happening here?
That's right.
Versus what I think is happening here.
That's right. Yeah. Challenging assumptions, looking at new perspectives. On the opposite side of a truth is another truth. All of that is like, yes. So the spirit was in relationship to developing trust and safety, maybe in like, how do I get employees to be honest with me about their experience? What's going well? What's not going well? And really, that's in a sense what we're talking about also, is creating safety, boundaries, expectations. The conversation you just had with your father was like an agreement that you had, and they were boundaries and parameters. What conversation are we actually having? What am I safe to say? This is really what came up for the guys, and I have the same question. So let me blanket this a little bit. And I also... Let me also layer this with a little more context. I have the book here, Never Lose an Employee Again. And I'm looking at the chapters, and here we go. There's 8 phases that we talk about, right? There's assess, accept, affirm, activate, acclimate, accomplish, adopt, advocate. Now, I know we're not going to have time to go into all those. I just wanted to tease the book. I wanted to mention that this was the root of all of this dialogue today. And what I want to ask you about is, this is a very open-ended question, Joey, so you take it where you want. We can launch off anywhere you want. It is around building relationships with our employees so that they might be able to talk openly, candidly, respectfully to each other, but also to the employer. And what comes up for me with that is particularly like reviews. Like right now in Front Row Dads in our company, I'm asking, should we be doing 360 reviews? Like, we got our annual meeting coming up. So then there's all these questions around, how do we execute that? And do we hire somebody or follow a system? Or who leads that? Do I lead that? Does the COO lead that? There's all sorts of questions that come up. So where do you want to go with this? Because I'm not asking a specific question, but I'm giving you kind of a category. How do we dig into this?
Yeah, if I may, Jon, what I think we should do is let's start at the big picture level, and then we can dive deep into some what are hopefully be some practical, tactical examples of how it applies. So at the big picture, you are spot on. If there is one thing that every employee is looking for in every industry, on every continent on the planet, it's a feeling of psychological safety at work.
Yeah.
And for those that may not be familiar with that term, basically, when you are in the workplace, does it feel safe to say what you want to say, to feel what you want to feel, to think what you want to think, to show up as the best version of yourself? In most business environments today, the answer to that question is no. Now, that's a stark judgment in reality, but that's what the research shows. That's what the experience of the people who are working in the organization show. So there are a number of incredible books that have been written about creating psychological safety and the things you can do. And a big piece of it hinges on this idea of conversations. And what are the types of conversations that are being had? What is the type of language that is being used? And I'm not saying that any of the guys in the group were coming from this perspective. But often when a leader says to me, well, I want my team to be more honest. I want me to tell them to tell me what's really going on. I say, great. Give me 3 examples of you being completely honest with them that have set the foundation for them understanding that that's what this relationship is about. And regularly I get, well, Joe, I don't want to bother them with all the stuff I'm dealing with, or like, it would be inappropriate for me to share. And I'm like, okay, so let's just step back from this for a second. Take the temperature down and realize that you're asking them to show up in a way in this relationship that you appear unwilling to show up yourself.
Yeah.
I call it you go first. If you want someone to be vulnerable with them. If you want someone to be honest with you, be honest with them. If you want someone to be kind to you, be kind to them. Lead by example. That's the great opportunity we all have, is to be leaders regardless of whether our title or our job description implies that we are. Every human has the ability to lead in a variety of different situations. So we've got the psychological safety. We've got the you going first. I also think it's important to look at our language. I am not a big fan of referring to people as employees or saying that people work for me. Now, some might say, oh, Joey, that's just semantics. You're lawyering the situation. I'm like, well, words actually matter. And, in my experience, words are incredibly powerful tools. For example, I have a team, not employees. And I specifically chose team because, to me, when you say team, it implies that we're bringing a group of people together to play a game for a set goal of winning the game we're playing. Now, that's Joey's definition of team, and that works for me. And I want my team to feel like we're coming together to play with a specific outcome we're trying to win at. The other interesting thing about a team is most people don't expect a team to be together forever. Look at any sport on the planet that they win a world championship or a national championship. It is highly likely that within a year or two, a significant number of those people have turned over and aren't on that team anymore. And yet, how do you create a dynasty? You keep building the team going forward, and the alumni become recruiters for the team, and they become legends, and jerseys are retired and things like that. So I think there's an opportunity to treat our players like a team, to practice together, to live together, to play together, to compete together, ideally to win together, but to come at it from a place of teamwork as opposed to this command and control. I am the employer, you are the employees, go do work for me. So at the 35,000 foot level, that's how I kind of see it. And happy to dive into some of the more specific tactics as well about how that can actually show up in your workplace.
And on that note, I was just talking about this with another front row dad this morning. We were talking about when you as the leader create change in your life, a lot of times what will happen, well, let me just give you this specific example. We were talking about how this person has kind of created a element of like peace and security and safety in their life, right? Let's say they've matured into this place of like gratitude, peace, and safety, and they're no longer in this like chaotic dance, that they were once in. And they were saying that around other people in their life, they were getting frustrated because they were all Zen-like and the other people were all chaotic. And I was like, how long have you been Zen-like in that relationship? Because sometimes it takes time for people to catch up. And maybe it's like, I don't know I'm sure it's different in different situations, but 6 months, a year. I've heard it in marriages. Like if you change, you can't expect that just because you've changed that your partner's going to change a week later. It might take a week, a month. It might take a year for that person.
It might be never, Jon.
Catch up.
It might be never. Here's the
course.
punchline, friends. It might be never.
Yeah, that's right.
The question is, if you're truly Zen, why is it bothering you that they're chaotic?
Right, that's the other question.
That's the question I'm left asking. I'm like, so are you using the word to describe the state you want to be in, or are you using it to? It's like I think, it's kind of like this.
It's always hard to point the finger at yourself.
It is.
Like, I was talking with a coach one time, and I think I said something like, "That person's so judgmental," and my coach went, "And then there were two."
Exactly. It's like physician, heal thyself. Yeah. It's oh man, there's so many layers to it, right? And so many pieces. I think, to me, it comes back to, I like to try to think of humans on a continuum. That at any given moment, we can be showing up as the best version of ourselves or the worst version of ourselves. And our job is to try to have the majority of the moments of our life show up as the best version of ourselves. And I don't know about you, Jon, but I notice with a lot of leaders, the self-judgment around how you show up is not the best way, in my experience, to move you towards the version of yourself you want to be. Because when we lambast ourselves for lashing out at the kids, when we beat ourselves up for a short, sharp tone with our spouse, when we, pound our head against the wall because of the way we responded to an email from a team member or an employee, I don't think that actually works. And I know I'm contrary to a lot of, the idea of you've just got to tough it out and you've got to get stronger and you've got to, be better and be perfect. I think if we're going to give the grace we need to give to others, we've really got to hone that skill by giving it to ourselves.
Yeah. In almost every case, that's what I feel I keep coming back to is what role do I play in it? Yeah, I got to bounce this. All right, so let's bookmark the review thing because I want to come back and spend a minute on reviews. Just anything you know about reviews, how to conduct them, any insights, case studies, blah, 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 right?
Sure.
But before we do, this came up recently with a coach with me, is that as a 7 on the Enneagram, and somebody I know is very optimistic, so back in the Front Row Foundation days when I was doing all that work, I actually came up with a framework, and part of it was hope. I became because I was helping people with life-threatening illnesses, and hope was an important piece of this in my mind in the framework. I think hope is a great thing. But like most things, there's a dark side to it. And the more mature I become, the more I recognize the downside of any upside, right? Or the difficulty in a positive. And so what I mean by that is, hope has played a role in my life and served me very well, but it also is hurting me because my coach reminded me that hope takes me out of the present moment. And what she meant by that was that if I'm living into the future of something, often I don't address what's happening right now because I'm like so hopeful that that other person will learn, change, grow. I'm hopeful that tomorrow's a new day. I'm hopeful I learn something new and deal with this situation better. But that hope pulls me out of presence, which is where I have a lot of power because my role in something, if I'm always hopeful around a person, I may not actually draw a line in the sand or hold a standard or say I'm upset or communicate a truth to them that allows them to change. So that has been my experience. And the way that I'm going to tie this to reviews is working with this coach was like having a review. She was not only complimenting my ability to be hopeful, but she was sharing with me how that contributes to people not changing, right? That's my role. That's my responsibility in that relationship. So I just wanted to share that as a recent context. Feel free to chime in on that if you wish. But I really want to know processes for these reviews of telling somebody, here's what's working, here's what's not. How often do we do it? whatever, just anything you want to say about it.
Well, I think it's a great segue into that conversation of reviews, because the challenge with reviews is they are notoriously historical. We're talking about most organizations do an annual review, if they do a review at all. In fact, the majority of organizations never do a review. So, full stop, I would posit that's problematic, right? Because if we're never taking stock of where things are, where the relationship is, the progress we're making, it becomes impossible as human beings to measure progress. And what we know to be true is all human beings want to feel progress. They want to experience progress. They want to think that next year is better than this year, which is better than last year, right? They want to be on that continuum. And I think what you mentioned about hope is really interesting, Jon, because wherever possible, I think we want to be trying to pull to the present as much as we can. Many leaders love to live in the future. Many managers love to live in the past. Many employees are caught wondering, well, who should I follow? The CEO who's all about the future, or my direct manager who's all about the past? And it's like, all of y'all are probably missing the boat, because what we should be focused on is the present. And are we doing our best to stay present in the present and live in the present? Because at the end of the day, that is actually the closest we will ever be to reality.
Yeah.
Because our vision of the future, our remembrances of the past, clouded as can be. What's happening right in this moment, a lot easier to figure out. So when it comes to reviews, number one, we need to do reviews. And by reviews, I mean we need to have conversations about what's working and what's not working, so that people have context, so that they can feel progress. We also need to do reviews. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing we probably need to rename reviews. Talking about nomenclature, if you call it a review, it's notoriously pushing it to that past that we're trying to avoid. But a check-in maybe, or, a progress meeting where we talk about, okay, where have we been? Where are we going? What are we trying to do here? And the thing about 360 reviews that you mentioned earlier is that often different people within the organization will have a different perspective of what it's like to work with you, depending on the context they have for the work. And what I like about a 360 review, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with this phrase, it's the idea that you're reviewing the people that report to you. They're reviewing you. Like, you're reviewing everyone around you, like in the various ways that you interact. Now, the larger an organization gets, the more complex this can be, because you might be reviewing 15, 20, 30 different people who are also reviewing you. And so it adds layers and layers. And the reason I share that is because often people will say, today's our day for annual reviews. And it's like, okay, this isn't a one-day thing, and it shouldn't be a once-a-year thing, and we're not going to get through all of it. So we need to give these type of activities the time they deserve. We need to give them the scope that they deserve. Then I think what we need to do is be very clear about the types of categories that we are going to be evaluating. I know many employees who have had the experience, and I've had this experience as walking into an annual review where they're thinking, hey, I've done a really good job. I've done X, Y, and Z. And they go into the meeting and they're like, hey, I've done X, I've done Y, I've done Z. These are the things that you said were important. And they're like, yeah, but there's this other thing over here that you're really kind of deficient on. And I'm like, when were you going to tell me that that was a metric by which we were measuring my performance? Because you never told me. You never told me in our conversation how you're going to evaluate. You didn't tell me during the hiring process. You didn't tell me during the onboarding process. You've never said it in any of our meetings. And now we show up for the annual review, whereas the employee, I'm coming in thinking pay raise, promotion, title bump, and you're telling me there's this criteria that I've been being evaluated on that I didn't know I was being evaluated on. Hugely problematic. Now, that being said, equally problematic is to say, well, you just don't feel like you're bought in, or it just doesn't seem like you get along with others as well as we'd like you to. We've got to give examples. The reason my books are so heavy on case studies, like the Never Lose an Employee Again has over 50 case studies from all 7 continents. That is by design. That is very intentional. And we left another 50 plus on the cutting room floor that we couldn't fit into the book. It's because when we give someone an example of either what they did that didn't work or what they did that worked, we give them context for the type of performance, the type of behavior, the type of showing up that we hope to see in the future. So what I like to do in these kind of conversations, and I do these with my team and with folks I work with, and I do this with my clients, and I do this with my wife and my kids all the time, is what I like to call stop, start, continue. And the way it works is this. What are 2 or 3 things that I'm currently doing that I should stop doing? What are 2 or 3 things that I'm currently not doing that I should start doing? And what are 2 or 3 things that I'm doing right now that you would love it if I continue doing? And the reason I ask for 2 or 3 is often the first one is kind of a throwaway. It's going to be something that doesn't really resonate. By the time they get to number 3, now you're getting into the juice. And I run this both ways. I just did this with my director of details. I don't have an assistant. I have a director of details, Faith. She's amazing. Her job is to keep track of all the details of my life because I spend a lot of time traveling and here, there, and everywhere, speaking and running workshops and consulting engagements, etc. So she directs the details. People will say to me, oh, your employee who, Faith, who works for you. And I'm like, actually, just to be clear, Faith works with me, not for me. It is a partnership. It is a collaboration. But we do stop, start, continue. And a lot of managers say, okay, great, Joey, I love that idea. Let's tell our people what they need to start doing, what they need to stop doing, and what they need to continue doing. I'm like, yes. And then they get to tell you. Right. Or what's even better is if you have them go first. Right? So that they create the space. Or maybe you say what your starts are and then they say what their starts are. Then you say your stops and they say their stops. And you do your continues and they do their continues. We get that 360 vibe going back and forth, and we do it more regularly than once a year. Last thing I'll say, there's a case study in the book that speaks directly to this. It's from a Brazilian company called IP Capital Partners. They do 360 reviews. The story tells how they went from a very toxic culture that was very toxic, maybe too strong a word, but a very politicized culture that we find in a lot of organizations where kind of the owners, founders seem to have all the control and all the money, and they're trying to bring in new team members and grow the business and grow the enterprise, and there's kind of control issues of who's in charge. They implement 360 reviews and they change the conversation. And the piece of this case study that I like the best is the dirty laundry session. And here's how the dirty laundry session works. They give everybody their 360 review. They let people sit with it and digest it and process it and think a little bit about it. Then they bring folks together and the person shares their dirty laundry from the 360 review and how they're going to incorporate this feedback into their life going forward. Now, it's a real interesting opportunity, John, because that leader could say, well, it says here I'm short with everyone, but I disagree with that, so that one was wrong, and blah, blah, you know what I mean? And versus, wow, I got some insight that often my economy of language gets read by people I interact with as me being short or frustrated, and it's not that I'm at all frustrated, it's that I am just very specific in my word choice. So what I am taking from this feedback is that if I can say it in one sentence, sometimes it's better to say it in 4. And it shows a little self-awareness, and it shows a little bit of ability to try. And my commitment to you going forward is I am going to try to say it in 4. And where I could use your help in this, if you're so inclined, is if I give you one sentence and you said to me, John, can you give me 3 more? Or Joey, can you give me 3 more? That will be a little trigger to me that I'm slipping into this habit that I'm committed to trying to change, but it's in a non-judgmental, we've agreed to the language before the situation rises. My wife and I will regularly have a conversation, and she's so great to indulge me on this. I'll say, are we having a conversation where I'm listening or where I'm offering suggestions?
Right.
And sometimes she'll say listening. And if she is going to be kind enough to give me that direct request, I need to honor that by closing my mouth and listening. And our team members are the same way. We can have a conversation with them. Hey, what kind of whenever somebody asks me for feedback, because I give a lot of speeches and I write books, people will come to me and they'll say, "Hey, I'd love to get your feedback on my speech." I'll say, "Great. What kind of feedback are you looking for?"
Yeah.
Because if you're looking for just the things that went well, happy to tell you the things I thought that went well. If you're only looking for the criticisms, I'm going to give you some criticisms, but I'm also going to give you some look well, because what that seems to indicate to me is you probably go through life only looking for self-criticism, not looking for self-promotion. So let me try to counterbalance a little bit of what you're doing, or I'll at least flag that. And I'll say like, hey, I understand that's what you want, but can I also share 2 or 3 things that I thought were done really well? Because in my experience, it's important for speakers to anchor into that too. So it can be a give and take in the conversation.
How often would you do this with your director of details, the start, stop, continue?
Oh, we do it about every 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we do it pretty regular, and as a general rule, we're having multiple interactions per day. I mean, we pretty much start every day with a 30-minute call, and we're back and forth on emails and voice messages throughout the day. So because of our frequency of interaction, and because she's also been a part of the team for about 5.5 months now, I'm trying to pattern the type of work environment that I want with the team. So that's the other thing I'll say, and I appreciate it brings up a thought. When we are interacting with any other human, we have the opportunity to acknowledge all the baggage and life experience that they are bringing to the conversation. So lots of times when we hire a new member to our team and we want them to be part of our new culture, we have a tendency to focus on the indoctrination and the onboarding into our culture without acknowledging that we may be doing a little bit of repair work on cultures they previously worked at and organizations they previously worked at. And on one hand, some leaders or business owners might be saying, well, Joey, that doesn't feel fair, and I don't want to have to deal with all that. And it's like, well, welcome to humans. This is how it works. We see this in dating relationships all the time. My wife and I have been married 13 years, and I said to her about a year ago, I think I'm finally at the place where I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's been a decade. And she has been beautiful and amazing in the way she has showed up every minute of that decade in terms of the point I'm about to make. But some of my past relationships had a level of volatility to them that things could turn on a dime and I would be caught off guard. So it created this kind of, this could all blow up at any second. Better be walking around as if we're, with the wire cutters. Am I going to cut the blue wire or the red wire? Because it's going to blow in 30 seconds at all times. That creates a frenetic state that is not a state any human should, I think, want to live in, let alone want for their most important personal relationship, their significant other, their spouse. But a decade in of her showing up every day, because of my own baggage, I'm finally like, okay, I think we're going to be good.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Joey, I hope people go get the book. There's so much more. We could obviously spend hours, days, weeks, months, years talking about all this, and no doubt it would be valuable and we'd have a great conversation. But let me bring it back to family for a moment, right? With respect to the clock. What is writing? What has the process of researching, writing, gaining the clarity around the principles in this book taught you about family life? Is there a bridge to be built between business and family? And what procedures, systems, knowings, whatever, could you carry over, even if it's just the essence of it?
Couple things. Yeah, I love this question, John. Number one, I suppose one of my biggest takeaways in writing the book is I hope my boys have the chance to experience being employees and being employers in their life. Because I don't think we can truly appreciate what it's like to be either unless we've actually done it ourselves. And I think many employers, and I know there's a lot of employers and leaders that listen to your show, it's been so long since you were a front row employee. I know you're a front row dad, right? But it's been a long time since you were a front row employee. I think that there's an opportunity to recognize that we can understand a perspective better if we have actually been in those roles or been in those shoes.
Yeah,
and John, so you know, I've tried to fix the camera here. It's for some reason it's decided to conk out and it won't let me switch back. So we'll just go with the darkness going forward.
Weave it in, Joey. I'll give you 10 bonus points if you weave in a dark camera.
I love it. I love it. So challenge accepted. Okay. So number one, I learned that I really hope my boys have that experience because I think it'll create perspective. Number two. Yeah. If we have, I think I would caution our front row dads to not treat their children like direct reports. Mm-hmm. And I'm guilty of this too, right? Where it's just like, I told you the task, just do the task. What is the thing? Like, and I found myself the other day, and I am not proud of this. But one of the things I'm trying to get my boys to do is to do a better job at turning off lights. I swear to God, I've become my grandfather.
Dude,
okay, and I'm just like, it's not about the dollars. It's about the consciousness of just sucking our planet of energy when there's no reason to have your bathroom light on all day. You're not in the bathroom. We can turn the light off. And I found myself actually saying, I'm going to have to talk to mommy about, like, do we need to start deducting from allowance or something for the lights on? And it was coming out of my mouth, and I was like, oh, my God, what are you saying? Like, what kind of a horrible employer would say, hey, you're not performing well, so we're going to cut your paycheck this week? What? Like, that is just an abysmal approach to management. So stop thinking of your people as employees, because I think your children as employees, because I think often we bring the worst forms of working with employees to the table when we're working with our children. So that being said, we do stop, start, continue with my kids. Now, I don't do it every 6 to 8 weeks, mainly because of their age. That just feels like, at least to me, that doesn't feel like a good fit. But, you know, where I share to them, hey, or share with them, what's daddy doing that you like? What's daddy doing that you don't like? What are we liking? We play a game called Best, Worst, Weirdest at dinner pretty regularly, where what was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? What was the weirdest part of your day? We follow Jim and Jamie Shields' 18 Summers model of board meetings, trying to have specific focused one-on-one time. Their book and their whole methodology on that is fantastic. If you're not familiar with it, go check it out right now, because if you're willing to have a board meeting as a business owner, why aren't you willing to have a board meeting with your most important shareholders in your life, which is your children and your spouse and your family, and like having those type of interactions. So yeah, those are some of the takeaways I've had from this adventure. And I think I want to come back a little bit, if I could, to that gentleness. You know, being a parent is kind of like navigating through the darkness. We're doing our best to figure out, you know, where is the light I can follow, and, you know, turning the lens out to the whole world and finding it to be pretty dark and murky. And like, I'm not exactly sure where I want to go. I think there's the opportunity to show a little bit of grace, to be gentle with ourselves. And the more we just accept that we're also growing and learning and evolving, I think the easier it is for us to interact with our children who are growing and learning and evolving as well.
Joey, I love it, man. I'm taking away the stop, start, continue, if maybe is how you said it. It does. I don't think the order matters, but I'm going to take that away. I think that's a really beautiful exercise. And I'm gonna put that into practice. And I would not be surprised if 5 years from now, when you're putting out your third book, if not earlier, that I will be I will be quoting that and talking about that at the same time. So I really appreciate this conversation. I thank you for spending some time with me today. And it's 11:54 on my clock. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to transition to your next call. And I just want to congratulate you, man, on not just creating a successful business for yourself that helps people around the world, but I want to tip my hat to you for building a family and for being willing to talk about it. And I just, I hope that our friendship continues to build over the years because we continue to learn and grow ourselves and then come back together and talk about it, when the time's right.
Oh, Jon, I so appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And thanks to all the front row dads who are listening in. If I can offer a parting message to everybody who was kind enough
Please.
to listen all the way to the end of the episode, try to figure out the things you want to stop, start, and continue in your life, but then also try your best to be gentle with yourself and others, because I think when we are gentle with ourselves and less critical with ourselves and less short with ourselves and less sharp with ourselves, it makes it easier to do that with the people we love and care about, whether those are employees, our spouse, our children, or the random stranger we meet on the street.
Yeah, well said. Guys, go check out Joey Coleman's work. I'm looking at the book right now on Amazon, Never Lose an Employee Again, The Simple Path to Remarkable Retention. And there are some incredible reviews that I'm reading here, people that have already gotten tremendous value from the book. I've downloaded the audio. I've been skipping around and listening to the chapters that I find really interesting and relevant to me in this moment. I love the stories, the case studies. As somebody who, I think your words were recovering lawyer, you've done a great job of proving your case, and I think you're great with bringing data into the, and the case studies in, and then letting people decide from there what they want to believe. And I think that's really, really cool. Jason Gaynard, our mutual friend, wrote a practical guide that every business owner, manager, and leader should read. It says, we've all heard the proverbial, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Nobody builds anything of significance without the support of a great team. And the stats around retention over the last few years have been downright scary. Goes on and on and on. But man, so cool, Joey. Is there a website that if they didn't get it from Amazon, where would you point them to?
One of the things that's important to me, Jon, with all of my books is that they're available in the format that works for you. So there's a hardcover if you like to take notes in the margin. There's an ebook if you like to read it on your Kindle or your Nook. And as you mentioned, there's an audiobook, which if you'd like the sound of my voice during this conversation, I narrate the audiobook. So I'll read the book to you. But it's available wherever you like to get books. If you like Amazon, great. If you like your indie bookstore, great. If you like Barnes & Noble, great. Wherever you want to go, you can get it there. And if you come to my website, there's bonus material there. So there's additional videos.
The Vault.
The Vault, you're right. Yeah. So there were so many things I wanted to put in the book that we just didn't have the space for. So we created this freely accessible vault where you just access, joeycoleman.com, the vault, and you can go right in and see kind of some of the bonus materials associated with the book. Those are the best places to find me and to find the book.
Joey, thanks, brother.
Thanks, Jon.
I wish you well.